Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Rachna Choudhry. I'm with the Hepatitis B Foundation, and I want to thank you all for joining us today. Before we get started, I'm just going to go over a few logistics and help you guys know how to participate in the webinar. So first, if you lose connection or have any issues with your computer audio, we also have the phone-in option listed on the screen right now. All attendees are muted throughout the presentation, but if at any time you'd like to ask a question, you are welcome to do so in the GoToWebinar control panel, where you can type in your question. We'll be monitoring the questions throughout the webinar, and we will have time at the end for Q&A. This webinar is also being recorded, so after the webinar, we will share a link to the recording and also the slides. So I also, before we get started, just wanted to give a quick overview of Hep B United for anybody who's not familiar with us. We are a national coalition that was co-founded and is co-chaired by the Hepatitis B Foundation and the Association of Asian Pacific Community Health Organizations. We were founded to address the public health challenge of hepatitis B, and we're dedicated to reducing the health disparities associated with Hep B by increasing awareness, screening, vaccination, and linkage to care for high-risk communities across the United States. Our coalition is comprised of more than 35 members across 18 states and the District of Columbia. We represent a variety of sectors, including health clinics, local and state health departments, community-based organizations, and academic and research institutes. And since today is an advocacy webinar, I also just wanted to say a few words about our policy priorities. And to give a bit of context on this, we believe that the need for federal attention and serious investments to combat hepatitis B in the United States is greater than ever. Despite having a highly effective and safe vaccine, as many as 2.2 million Americans are currently living with chronic hepatitis B, and up to 1,200 babies are born each year with hepatitis B infection in the U.S. Only 25% of infected individuals are aware of their infection, and less than 10% of infected individuals are able to access care and receive treatment. Hepatitis B is also associated with significant health disparities. It disproportionately impacts Asian American, Pacific Islander, and African immigrant communities. Also, right now, there has been some scientific consensus on what research is needed in order to find a cure for hepatitis B. And in 2017, the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine released a report calling for the elimination of hepatitis B by 2030. So today, with that context, we'll be sharing strategies and tips for meeting your members of Congress or communicating with them from outside of DC to keep them engaged on these important issues. Within the Hep B United Coalition, we recently did a policy and advocacy priorities survey. And for this year, the 3 priorities that we're focusing on are what are listed on the screen right now. So first is increasing funding for hepatitis B surveillance and prevention, which includes testing and linkage to care programs. The second priority is to find a cure for hepatitis B, and that will take increased funding, specifically within the National Institutes of Health, that focuses on hepatitis B and liver cancer research. And our third policy priority is to increase funding to improve adult hepatitis B vaccination coverage. So to help us, now that we have an idea of the issues, to help us understand how we can communicate these to our lawmakers, I am happy to introduce Rachna Choudhry, who's the co-founder and chief marketing officer for POPVOX.com. Rachna has years of experience working with nonprofits, consulting on grassroots advocacy strategies. She consults with organizations, trade organizations, and companies to help them connect their supporters and employers with their lawmakers in DC. She has more than 15 years of experience in advocacy, having worked with several nonprofit organizations before founding POPVOX, which is a nonpartisan platform that helps constituents track legislation and write letters to their lawmakers, which are then aggregated for others to read and share. So I'm pleased to welcome Rachna, and I will pass it over to her now.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to speak here, and I'm very excited to be part of this effort. So advocacy sounds like a very complicated term, but it's actually just about telling your story. And anytime through this webinar, if you have questions, just type it into the chat and someone will flag it for me. So what is advocacy anyway? It's about sharing your story to educate others, whether it's the public or your community or lawmakers, and then motivating them to take action. And that could be in any form, from organizing, from doing webinars like this, to hosting a conference or attending a conference, and of course, coming to Washington, D.C. to talk face-to-face with your lawmakers. And the most important thing in terms of advocacy is to know you are the issue expert, and that's why you're here to share your story. And whether you can come to DC or not, and whether you're doing this from your own hometown or congressional district, you are an expert in your own way. And that's, if you can remember one thing from this webinar, it is that, and it's important to share your story. Hep B United does an awesome job of collecting these stories, and if you go to the website, there's so many stories of real people sharing their experiences, and it's amazing how sometimes when I speak to groups, one of the first things is to try to tell them to do a story sharing thing. So the fact that it is there and it's available just makes it so much easier to hear someone else's story and then to speak up and share your own story. I understand sometimes sharing stories can be a little nerve-wracking, especially when you're talking to lawmakers. It may seem intimidating. And the thing that I always try to remind myself, not just from training other folks to do this, but back from when I was working for a nonprofit organization myself, is the story of Camilla Tioli. And probably no one has heard of her before. I didn't until I was doing research for this. In 1912, so over 100 years ago, Camilla Tioli was 14 years old, and she became injured in a textile mill in Massachusetts. As a 14-year-old back then, it was very common for children to work long hours for little pay, like 50 to 60-hour weeks, making about $6 a week. She was injured so severely, she was hospitalized for 7 months. When she got out of the hospital, somehow a lawmaker, a member of Congress, asked her if she could come speak about her experiences. And she had no idea how Congress works. She's 14 years old. She hadn't been to school, but she showed up in DC and testified before Congress and answered their questions. Now, back then, most people thought children should be at work, not playing or at school. And she shared her story. And in the audience was Helen Taft, who was the First Lady of the United States at the time. And she was so struck by this young woman's testimony that she told her husband, and she got invited to the White House to share her story there. Now, her Camilla Tioli's story pretty much ends there, because after that, she had a great trip to DC, went back and worked 60-hour weeks at the textile mill. But her telling the story inspired other people to start fighting for child labor laws. And a year later, the first child labor laws were put into action. So even if you feel like there's no direct impact, sharing your story is really important. And I always think of her when I'm nervous about speaking to others. So a couple of quick things. Your personal story matters to lawmakers, and here's evidence from congressional staffers and from lawmakers themselves. They're always saying it's very important to hear from constituents, and even one or two voices can really make a difference. I'm here more to talk also about how can you be effective in sharing that story. So here's a couple of tips. First, appeal to the heart rather than the head. Any of us that have seen commercials that have made us choke up, and there's so many commercials that really, you watch the 60-second, 30-second commercial on TV, and then all of a sudden you're like calling your mom in tears or buying Kleenex or I don't know what. But they appeal because they tell a story, and there's a science behind that. Storytelling is twice as effective as statistics. And there's a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, Deborah Small, that did research about this. And what she did was she had two samples, two groups of people, and she gave one group a fact sheet full of statistics about food shortages in Africa. The other group got a story about one little girl who was struggling because she didn't have food and her family didn't have access to food. This professor then gave play money to each group and asked them who would they rather, how much money would they want to donate to that campaign. And the people that got the fact sheet full of statistics without the personal story gave half of what the group that heard the story about that one person. So people's stories make a big difference, and that's what you're tasked with doing as an advocate. But also, after you tell your story, go straight to the ask, because once they've connected with you in person and they feel that appeal to the heart, then go straight to the ask, whether it's about increasing funding or a particular bill or whatever it is that you want to talk about that as well. How you deliver your message also matters, especially for lawmakers. Lately, for probably the last 5 or 10 years, we've all gotten those emails about like, click here, add your name to a petition, or add your name to a form letter and we'll do the rest. Now that is convenient, and that might get someone that's not very interested in the issue to participate. But time and again, studies have found that when a lawmaker or their staff is looking for information to arrive at a decision about an issue, what their constituents say matters, and how they say it matters. The most important is an in-person visit from a constituent. So for the folks coming to DC to meet with lawmakers and their staff, that is a very compelling thing. And I know it's pretty far to get out here to Washington, DC, but it is definitely worth it. Also, any individualized, personalized mail, whether you're writing an email, even if you're given the opportunity to use a form letter, go ahead and personalize it, because taking those 2 minutes to share your story as a patient, as a medical provider, as a mother, as a daughter, whatever your story is, that really makes a difference. And now if you look at this graph, all the way down toward the bottom is a visit from a lobbyist. And I used to be a lobbyist, so I found that disheartening. But it is true, when lawmakers go to the House floor to make a passionate speech about an issue they care about, they don't say, oh, this lobbyist came into my office. They're talking about, Sarah or Aunt Becky from the district that has a really compelling story, because that they know that those stories really work. For folks not coming to DC, there's a lot of things you can do to target your lawmakers from far away. And one really good example is a letter to the editor. Every lawmaker in DC knows what's happening in their hometown district by reading their local newspapers. So if you can get into a letter to the editor or an opinion column, something like that in the hometown of your lawmaker, I guarantee that's going to be up on their desk in Washington, D.C. One more tip that I have learned is focusing on quality and not necessarily quantity. Now, it's very easy on social media to see some tweet getting 1 million likes or something like that. Well, when it comes to making decisions, lawmakers often say that volume isn't necessarily effective. This I just pulled from a congressman's website because it just said it so succinctly. Sometimes 10 thoughtful and well-argued letters can have as much impact as hundreds of calls or postcards. And that is also about storytelling. But there is something to be said about quantity as well. And that is the use of social media. You use social media to amplify the message. And just in case you've forgotten the hashtags, they're at the bottom, Hep B Unite and Just B. But you don't want to rely only on social media. And a lot of times we get so caught up with the, I don't know, the glitter and glamour of social media. I guess it's not as glamorous as it was in the past, but we do get caught up in seeing how many likes we have, and sometimes we forget that the old-fashioned storytelling, face-to-face interaction has as much weight as it did even before social media. And the other kind of side note to that also is lawmakers want to hear only from their own constituents. You don't even have to be a voter. You have to be a constituent from their district. And oftentimes in social media, it's very difficult for them to see who is from their district and who is not from their district. So that's why relying on social media isn't the best, most strategic way to run an advocacy campaign. And also don't rely on petitions. If we were face-to-face, I assume we would have some smirks or chuckles because I love this slide and I use it often. Unless you're trying to build your email list, and sometimes you have to build your email list, but petitions don't work because we don't know who these people are. And I saw this petition, I think 2 years ago, and I don't think those are real people's names. Also, people want to hear back. If they care enough that they're going to add their name to something, they want to hear back as to what's happening with that campaign. So it's really important to develop a relationship with people that have signed on. That said, and this is probably if you saw me, I have a sad face right now. Policymaking is hard. It takes a long time, and that's the honest truth. When you look at big pieces of legislation that have made a lot of difference in people's lives, it's taken years. Medicare is probably one of the best examples. It took 20 years for it to pass, and it was during President Truman's time when it was originally proposed, and it was so significant that it took that long to pass Congress that LBJ went to Truman for the signing ceremony, because by then Truman was super old. But that doesn't mean we don't do it. It's just when people experience advocacy fatigue, when they get tired of trying to, beat the same dead congressional horse, well, stay at it and inspire each other and support each other through that, because sometimes you just need to take a break. That's okay. Switch to a different type of call to action, or try talking to other people about the issue, or be creative and find creative ways to share your message. Do we have any questions right now? Great. So if you're coming to the Capitol, to good old Washington, D.C., I have a couple of tips, and then of course when you're here we're going to do some in-depth training as well. One thing that I always remind people when they come to DC is that meetings are very short. lawmakers and staffers don't have much time, and it's just because of the volume of interactions that they have with their constituents. Most congressional offices have only about 15 staffers working in their office, but they're dealing with literally hundreds of thousands of constituents. Or if you're from a state like California, millions of constituents. So meetings are often just 15 minutes long, and when you have a big group of people that are at the meeting, it goes by really quick. So it's good to have your one-pager with you to leave behind. And if you have if you want to develop your own unique one-pager, that's great too. Or Hep B United will have one-pagers as well. But also tell your story really quick and then go to the ask really quick, because you don't know when that staffer is going to start looking at their phones being like, oh my gosh, I'm being pulled in to another meeting, or there's a vote happening. And if you get to meet with the member themselves, that's really special too. Make sure you take a photo, because everyone loves seeing photos. And then that's where you can use social media to amplify that participation as well. And on this slide, on the top right, is just from the one of the Senate office buildings, and it's just like a really cool statue in the middle of the office building, and it's a good place to take photos. So that's kind of my one little fun tidbit as well. Oh, and wear comfy shoes, because sometimes you have to walk a lot from office to office. So it's a lesson I've learned the hard way. So for folks coming to DC, or folks that aren't able to come this time, just a good tip is about doing your homework about the lawmaker and about the district. And this is probably the most common when I talk to congressional staffers and ask them, what tip can I tell advocates that I'm training? This is their one request. And it's important because you want to know how this issue connects with that lawmaker's district. And so do your homework, about opioid, about, is there any personal connection with, say, liver cancer, for example? Or I put Tammy Duckworth's photo here from last year, because she just had a baby. So I'm sure that getting a Hep B vaccine was on her mind with her baby. So any way that you can connect and know what committee that member of Congress is on, so that you can help the staffer do their job, is always a good thing. And the other tip that I always get, and it's less of a tip, more of a request from staffers, is just to be kind and not say things like, and this is a true story, a staffer told me that who was coming from the rare disease community, and there was a particular disease she was lobbying about, and she told the staffer, how would you like it if your grandma died from blah, 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 and just started attacking the staffer. And the staffer just froze because she didn't know how to handle that situation. So a little kindness always goes a long way, because you're trying to build a relationship, and you have to call back in a couple of weeks and say, hey, how have you made progress on the ask? So you don't want to be too confrontational. So for folks that can't come to DC, there's a huge list of things you can be doing. And first and foremost, and I think Rhea will be talking about this in a minute, is to sign up for the Action Center and tell your friends about it. Put a link on your social media so other people can find out about it. And as you're having conversations with people, it's a resource you can send them to. But also, if you can't come to DC, provide support and amplify the message of the people here. So whether it's just finding other people's photos on social media from their visits on the Hill and retweeting that or sharing that with with your networks. That's really important. But then also just talk about the issue. You know, if people in your community aren't familiar with Hep B, this is a really good time saying, hey, have you been tested? What are your vaccinations? What's your vaccination situation right now? And talk to them about it, and especially their family members as well. My dad has just recently been diagnosed with some liver issues, and that was the first thing that I thought. I was like, Dad, have you been tested? And then say, hey, this is an actual national issue. And I have friends out in Washington, D.C. talking to their lawmakers right now. And that's a good way to connect, you know, a very personal conversation with what's happening in D.C. And then ask them to go take action. So once you connect the dots and make something very personal into a policy message, it really resonates with people because they may be all good and they might, you know, their whole family members may be vaccinated, may be aware, but then they can do something beyond just that. Write a letter to the editor about what's happening in Washington, D.C., or meet with the lawmakers district office. Hey, you couldn't come to D.C., but these are folks that would be interested about what's going on as well, and invite them to something or someplace. Staffers in the district office love field trips. Everyone loves field trips. So if you can invite them to a clinic, or if you're having an awareness meeting or a town hall about it, or a conference or anything like that, invite them. People love getting out of the office, and then they'll learn about it too, and it goes a long way in building a relationship. And then also well, I'm not sure if Congress, how long they're going on recess in August, but it's a prime time for town hall meetings, and attend a town hall meeting and talk to your lawmaker face to face about the issue. I'm reminded of a staffer that gave me an example. I said, do you have an example of like one person talking to a lawmaker making a difference at a town hall meeting? And she said that when this is about 2 years ago, when her lawmaker was out during August recess out in the district, a constituent came up to him afterwards and showed him a postcard that she had received from the Social Security office. And the postcard had her Social Security number written below her home address on the postcard. And she thought that was like a weird privacy violation. It was great to save money by not using an envelope and sending things through postcard. However, everyone that saw the postcard saw her Social Security number. So this lawmaker was shocked by that. It was a 5-minute conversation. He went back to DC, introduced legislation about Social Security privacy, and it passed within a couple of months. So things can happen very quickly when you get one lawmaker in like a 5-minute conversation. So that's something to think about as well. So if you have questions, here's just another fun photo of the Capitol in case you're thinking about coming to DC. And I will pass it along to Rhea.
Thank you so much. So just a reminder, we have received questions so far in the chat box, but just a reminder that you can continue to do so within the GoToWebinar control panel. I will pause to ask a couple real quick, and then I'll go over the Hep B United Action Center. So one comment/question is about the person says they agree that the personal story is very important. But do you think that the statistics need to be included but brief? For example, with the Ask or Science Driven, and also congressional district demographics, making the Hep B issue important to constituents?
Yes, so the statistics are important, and that's often what you have in your one-pager. And when you're there telling your story of why you're there, you don't need to read them your fact sheet about all the statistics. It's something that they can research too. You're just putting a face and a story to those statistics. And especially now with like the internet and Google, staffers can find statistics pretty fast, but they can't find that story. And oftentimes that's the one story they need to tell their boss, saying so-and-so in our district is having this issue, and it's really important. And then the statistics can back that up.
Thanks, that's really helpful. And that I will just add to that, that if you are coming to DC for the Advocacy Day, we will have fact sheets, as Rachna mentioned. We're going to be preparing the statistics that will help equip you the day of. So the biggest contribution that you will have is thinking about what those personal stories are and being ready to share your perspective and make it more of a personal issue for the staffer or congressperson that you're meeting with.
And if you have any local statistics of how it affects the district or the hometown, I always say hometown because, like in a state like California, there may be clusters, especially with the Asian American community. So it's really important to know that kind of information as well. And that's something to add onto a fact sheet or something to follow up with when you're doing a follow-up email, just to provide like a little bit more information.
There's another question about, could you share tips or talk more about meeting with district offices?
So district offices, and this is something where in the past, traditionally, your district office is where you went if, say, you were having trouble with getting a passport or had, needed help with the Social Security Administration or something like that. But more and more advocates are leaning to the district office to invite them to things and to inform them as well. Policymaking has really become like a all hands on deck effort in congressional offices. My advice would be to, well, first make an appointment, see who's available to talk about that particular issue. And if they say, oh, we're going to refer you to the DC office, that's fine to set up a phone call there. But for people in the district offices, they really like to attend things out in the field because that helps them also get the word out on behalf of their lawmaker as well. So invite them to something. If they don't want to have a meeting about policy in their office, well, they'll probably want to come out into the field if there's like a awareness day happening or to see a health center or something like that. They'll definitely want to come out. And also, it's a good opportunity for them to spread their member of Congress's name out in the community. And even though they don't do election work from the district office, campaigning is a whole different thing. It does help when your lawmaker has name recognition, and that's what they're going for.
Okay, we have a few more questions. One of them is if you could share any tips about talking about hepatitis B in a tough economic climate for public health funding and for racial and health equity.
Wow. So I think a lot of organizations right now are experiencing this, and Rhea, if you want to chime in also, where it's a tough environment in a lot of ways. And my first advice would be, this is a long-term fight also. Like, if funding isn't increased today, well, we got to keep at it and educate people so that funding for this issue is increased next year or the year after or whenever. And it's just not a one-time thing, because funding for very important issues need to get increased year over year. Now, there's a lot of people that feel, oh, well, why bother, because the administration seems unfriendly or congressional leadership may seem unfriendly. But that's not the thing. You have to think about it as this is a nonpartisan issue. Hep B affects everyone, regardless of what their political affiliation is. And especially with the Asian American community, it's often the statistics aren't as readily available as other communities. So it's really important to get that voice out because they might not have heard it before. And as a lawmaker, it's their job to represent everyone, and they should be aware about, especially about what's happening in a minority community affecting their district. So my advice would be, don't be deterred by what's happening big picture-wise. If you feel disheartened by what's happening with the administration, for example, remember this is a nonpartisan issue and you're there to educate everyone on that issue. And you never know where that lawmaker or that congressional staffer is coming from. You don't know what their situation is, and it might be an issue that they care about deeply. And especially with, say, like opioids or connecting it with liver disease, make sure that you do your homework about those issues as well and make those connections. And also, advocacy fatigue is a thing, and that's why just make sure you bring someone along, bring someone new into the fold, just to keep it still exciting and passionate as well.
There were so many good points in that. I just really agree with what you said about it being a long-term fight. And so even if we're coming to DC at a time or meeting with our lawmakers at a time when we don't think they're going to be able to respond or offer us any type of promises or anything like that, there's always the opportunity to educate new members of Congress, to maintain relationships with offices that we already have a friendly relationship with. And so in times when there are opportunities for a policy change or funding to be increased, then they would hopefully then think of us because we've spent all this time developing the relationship and bringing them updates on statistics and how hepatitis B is, how the statistics are increasing or changing in their district. And so I think that what you said is really important, and just even if we don't think something's going to happen right away, that the educational process will make a difference in the long run. And also what you said about staffers not knowing where they came from. We have a story of one of our partners, or actually one of our staff who was just in an office talking about hepatitis B and C and the opioid epidemic. And I think it turned out that the staffer had a personal story of his own, a family member who was affected by liver disease, liver cancer. And so they were very interested when they learned the connection between Hep B and C with liver cancer, and wanted to do something, help write a bill, help sponsor a bill. And that, you know, just came from the conversation that they had without knowing before that the staff person had an interest in it.
That's a really good story.
So I know we may be getting a few more questions in, but I'm going to go ahead and go over a couple of other slides really quick, but feel free to send more questions in. Actually, one of them that I'm following up on now is this: if I can't participate on the July 24th Hill Day, how can I support from home? And so that is a great segue for me to introduce, if you haven't heard us talk about this or seen us email you about it yet, there is the Hep B United Action Center that we launched last year. And so you may already know about it. You may have signed up for this webinar because you heard about it through this Action Center. But if you don't know about it yet, or if you have friends who might be interested, we'll share the link, or it's on the hepbunited.org website as well. But all it requires is for you to share your name, email address, and then your state and zip code. And that is to help us identify whenever we have potentially state-specific targets in Congress for bills or for funding opportunities, then we can reach out to certain people, or at least, you know, we can keep you informed on things that are relevant to your state or district. But in general, even if you just sign up with just your email address, you will receive newsletters from us. Right now it's a quarterly newsletter, but we also send out action alerts when things are happening here in DC that we want to keep our Hep B advocates informed about. And so as an example, I pulled up an old action alert that we sent out in around February or March of this year. So we work a lot with with the broader hepatitis advocacy community, and we there was a member sign-on letter circulating in support of viral hepatitis funding. And so one thing that we did is we shared the letter with our Hep B United Action Center subscribers, and we set up an easy way for you to contact your member of Congress just to let them know that this sign-on letter was circulating, and to encourage them to sign on. And as Rachna mentioned, so this is a form template that we set up through our system to help make it easier for you to contact your members. So instead of having to look up just the general email address, this will connect you to the health staffer in that office. You just have to, again, fill out, your address, including zip code, so that you're matched with the correct congressional office. This is showing my representative actually after I filled out the form. So the form, though, so we give you the language within that suggested email, but it's actually customizable. So if you're going through this process and you have a chance, you can actually write in additional sentences about yourself and why hepatitis B matters to you. And I always, if I'm customizing one of these form letters, I always try to do it right at the top so that it does get noticed and doesn't look like just another one of the same emails that the congressperson is receiving. So this is just one of the tools that we're offering through the Hep B United Action Center, but also we're really trying to build up our advocacy resources a bit more. Like I said, the newsletter is only quarterly right now, but around the time of, actually on July 24th, when we are hosting our annual Hep B United Advocacy Day, we do have a plan to engage those of you who are not going to be in DC. So the way to stay in touch with that is to sign up for the Action Center and follow us on social media. We'll, share information in advance about hashtags that we'll use, potential tweets, suggested, tweets that you can copy and direct to your lawmakers. And we'll also have, similar to what's on the screen right now, a email that can be sent. For example, there is a Congressional Hepatitis Caucus, and so because our Advocacy Day on July 24th is the week of World Hepatitis Day, we think it would be a great message to send that week is to just include a few general statistics about hepatitis B, talk about, you could add in and customize your own statistics from your district, and then the ask or the action alert within the email that you would send is to see if they would sign up to be part of this Congressional Hepatitis Caucus to stay involved in the issues and receive information from the co-chairs who lead that. So we will definitely share also in the follow-up to this webinar, I'll share the link to sign up for that. And we can also follow up with everybody who attended to receive information about the action alert that we'll put out on July 24th. And then if you are attending our Advocacy Day, you will be receiving more information in the coming days about additional prep calls that we're going to offer that will specifically go over the fact sheets and the materials that we'll be leaving behind with offices. So that will be more of an in-depth dive to help you prepare on specific talking points and to know maybe what information we're missing that you could add from your state. And then again, of course, to think about how to frame it all together with a personal story. And so I'm going to check now to see if there are other questions, because we do still have some time, or if Rachna, if you had anything to add to that. Do you think, I do have a question. Do you think, or how do you think election years influence advocacy?
This is something that I've been trying to follow over time, where there's some organizations that feel, oh, it's an election year, so let's put advocacy in the back burner and focus on turning out the vote. But I feel, and I'm seeing this more commonly, that advocacy is a year after year, year-round activity. And the lesson that should be learned or needs to be learned is that for an advocacy organization or an issue-based organization, you have to be doing issue education every day, every year, regardless of the election, because the issue isn't going to go away. It's not going to just pause because there's an election coming up, and people need to be informed. And oftentimes, the result of kind of doing the switching back and forth thing is that the issue gets lost, or people think, oh, I'm not hearing about it anymore, so whatever it was must have gotten solved. And that's not the case. And especially when we look at health issues, it oftentimes needs a lot of people talking about it before it reaches a tipping point. And I think when you look at the opioid epidemic, this has been happening for a really long time, but only now are all of us talking about the issue. And for something like hepatitis B, we were actually talking about this just before we started the webinar. We need to make sure that our community knows about it, the APA community, but also the larger public needs to know about it and needs to be talking about it, and not talk about diseases with stigma, but talk about it openly. And then once it becomes something that's really talked about, lawmakers can be pushed even further to address it. Now, politics often takes over. The other side of this is the fatigue. What I've seen, especially after 2016 with a lot of organizations, is there are folks who are out there mobilizing, getting out the vote in 2016, and then suddenly 2017 came around and people felt, regular activists felt, well, the election didn't go the way I wanted it to go, so I'm just going to sit out because my voice doesn't matter anymore. And that's my fear in a lot of issue-based advocacy, that people feel that their voice doesn't matter. I'm here to say your voice does matter, and there are people that are mobilized and more active than ever before. And so this is a long-winded way of saying that you have to be doing issue education and mobilization and broadening your network every single day, year-round, regardless of whether this is an election year or not.
We have a really good follow-up question to that. What strategies could advocates use to promote Hep B as an issue or have it be part of the conversation in elections or in campaigns?
Well, you're going to be, and keep in mind, we're nonpartisan here. So I say this for Democrats and Republicans, you're going to be seeing your lawmakers out in the district more often. Just because, surprise, surprise, there is an election and they need to go out and remind people to vote. The thing is that your lawmaker, when they're not doing election stuff, but they represent everyone, regardless of whether or not they're a voter. So young people, immigrants who don't have the right to vote, anybody, they represent everyone within their district. That's really important to keep in mind when they're out there trying to get people out to vote. It's a really good time to show up to things. They're going to have more town halls than ever because it is an election year and they want to look visible. So talk to your lawmakers, attend those events, invite them to things, and then say, hey, I'm an advocate for Hep B. Let me tell you a little bit about it and tell you why it affects me, or it affects our community, or affects our congressional district. The other thing is, especially now, this year more than any other year, people are running for office like crazy, and especially people of color, especially women, are running in record numbers. And that's really great. And talk to them. They might not get elected this year, or they might get elected, but they might not get elected, but they're trying, and they're trying to be part of the system. So why not inform them now? Because maybe even if they don't win this year, they're going to try running again in 2 years, and who knows, they might win then, but they've already been educated about the issue. But more importantly, you've built that relationship with them or with their campaign manager or whoever it is, so that they know if they need a quote or a talking point or something about a disease that affects their community, they're going to reach out to you. And if you can get them early on in the whole election process, that's even better, because as back in the day when I was a lobbyist, the best thing I could do was be a resource for a congressional staffer or a lawmaker, because then if they call me about anything else, and I was a lobbyist for a women's organization, and I worked on work and family balance issues and paid sick days, paid family leave, but I would get calls from staffers about postpartum depression. That's an issue I do not work on. My organization didn't work on it, but they had a question, and they knew I did something related to women, so they'd call me. But then I would try to help them as best as I could using, like, say, Google, but it gave me a way to say, hey, oh, by the way, since I have you on the phone, let me give you a quick update of what we're working on. So it was like a really good way to sneak in my issue. And after a while, it sticks in their brain and they remember it. And that's what you want to be. You want to be strategic about it, and not think, oh, because they're trying to run for office, that you give them a free pass about the issues.
Thank you. And I think as we have time for one or two more questions, one that goes back to the storytelling aspect, what tips do you have for people who maybe are coming not necessarily with their own personal story, but they work for a community health center, they work for a clinic, they're a provider? What kind of tips do you have for them on how should they share stories if they're not their own personal stories?
The story when you're a health professional or you work in a clinic, or even as a volunteer raising awareness, those are equally important too. I would start the sentence with as a whatever it is. So even if you're a healthcare provider, as a doctor or as someone that works at a health center, this is what I'm seeing, because you're providing them with first person on the ground eyes on what is happening in their community. They don't want to be caught not knowing something, especially with cell phone cameras everywhere. They don't want to be like, oh, I didn't know about this issue. So always start your sentence with as a whatever it is. And that's really important. If it's not affecting you medically directly, it's still affecting you, because it's about the community, it's about the work that you're doing, and it's also just about, they need to know what businesses are out there, what healthcare providers are out there, what is happening there, and start that way. Don't think just because you're a care provider in whatever sense that may be, that your story is anything less than that. Actually, you're speaking on behalf of a lot of patients or a lot of families that are affected by the disease, and your story is equally important as a first-person person that's dealing with it.
Well, I'm just checking. I don't think any other audience questions have come in, but I really think that what you've given us is a good overview for people who want to get involved in advocacy, whether they're attending a Hill Day in the near future, or if they're just wanting to figure out what they can do from home until they do have an opportunity to meet with their lawmakers in person. Thank you, Rachna, so much for the presentation. That was really, really very helpful.
And have fun with this, because when you speak from the heart about something that really affects your life, your community, when you talk about what you see, there's an authenticity to it that makes it real, and people remember that. And especially nowadays when everyone's just yelling at each other on social media, when you talk about something, you know, from the first person, this is what I'm seeing every day, this is what I'm experiencing, this is what my father is going through, whatever it is, when you're authentic, that's what resonates with people now more than ever. And making a connection like that, or even that example of the staffer who connected because they knew it firsthand as well, that's really special. And remember that, because once in a while, that's the kind of connection you make, and then you're like, wow, this is really, really exciting, and I'm so excited to be an advocate. So come to Washington, D.C., or do it from your district, but it's very important for our community.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a really good tip, to have fun with advocacy and not to be afraid of it. So I want to thank you again for spending the time doing this General Advocacy 101 training for us. Again, if you guys could sign up for the Hep B United Action Center if you haven't already, that would be a great next step to stay involved and to get our newsletters and to get more tips on how to join the July 24th advocacy messaging and social media that we'll be doing, even if you're not coming to DC. If you have questions, additional things you didn't get to say today, you can email advocate@hepb.org. You can also connect with us on social media. And there will be, again, we will be sharing the recording of this. So feel free to share the recording, share the slides with anybody else you think might want to engage on this issue. And also there will be a survey after this webinar ends. When you close out, it should pop up. We would really appreciate getting your feedback on the content and how helpful this webinar was for your advocacy efforts. So with that, I'll go ahead and close, and thank you all again. And we will send out more information for the next advocacy webinar in a few months. Thank you.
Thank you.